They didn't arrive with flags or uniforms. There were no speeches, no declarations, no cameras rolling. In village after village across rural Afghanistan, the Taliban returned quietly, almost invisibly, filling spaces that had been left empty for years. This is not the story most people know. This is not about frontline battles or suicide bombings. This is the story of how power really works when no one is watching hand. How the Taliban ran a shadow government across Afghan villages long before the world realized they were back. Stay with this story till the end, because the last minutes reveal why this system was far more powerful than bullets or bombs. And if you want deeper untold histories like this, make sure to visit the channel for the next video. After 2001, the world believed Afghanistan had entered a new chapter. The Taliban regime had collapsed. Major cities fell quickly. But far from Kabul's press conferences and foreign aid offices, life in rural Afghanistan followed a very different rhythm. Villages scattered across mountains, deserts, and river valleys were still governed by something much older than any modern state-local power: tribal influence and daily survival. For many villagers, the central government was not something they experienced. Officials rarely visited. Police posts were understaffed or corrupt. Courts were distant, expensive, and slow. If a farmer had a land dispute, a theft, or a family conflict, there was often nowhere to turn. At first, they did not announce themselves as rulers. They presented themselves as mediators. A man would arrive on a motorcycle, sometimes at night, sometimes openly during the day. He would listen. He would promise quick justice. He would say, "We will resolve this according to Islamic law." This was the beginning of the Taliban's shadow courts. These courts were not buildings. They were rooms in homes, mosques, or even under trees. Judges were often local men trained in religious law, sometimes with little formal education, but deep cultural authority. Cases were resolved quickly, sometimes in hours, sometimes in days. No paperwork, no bribes, no travel to distant cities. For villagers used to waiting months or years for government justice, this speed felt revolutionary. But justice came with a price. Once people accepted Taliban arbitration, they also accepted Taliban authority. Slowly, quietly, legitimacy shifted. As trust grew, the system expanded. The Taliban did not just resolve disputes. They began to collect taxes. Farmers were asked to give a small portion of crops. Shopkeepers were told to contribute. Zakat. Truck drivers passing through Taliban-controlled roads paid transit fees. These payments were often lower than what corrupt officials demanded, making them feel acceptable, even fair. This was not random extortion. It was organized. Receipts were sometimes issued. Records were kept. Funds were distributed upward through a network that stretched across provinces. The shadow government was becoming financially independent. At the same time, the Taliban focused heavily on security. In villages plagued by banditry, theft, or abuse by local militias, Taliban fighters enforced strict order. Crimes dropped sharply in some areas. Thieves were punished brutally, but predictably. For many villages, fear felt preferable to chaos. This is the uncomfortable truth. In places where the state failed, the Taliban offered certainty. Education also became a tool of governance. In some areas, Taliban-approved schools operated quietly. Curriculum focused on religious instruction, obedience, and ideology. Even where formal schools existed, Taliban influence shaped what teachers could say and what students could learn. Music disappeared. Certain books vanished. Ideas narrowed. Meanwhile, the official Afghan government struggled to extend its reach. Development projects were announced but rarely completed. Roads stopped halfway. Clinics ran out of supplies. Teachers went unpaid. When villagers complained, nothing changed. When they complained to the Taliban, something happened fast. This contrast mattered more than any speech by politicians. The Taliban also mastered information control. They spread messages through mosques, word of mouth, and handwritten letters known as night letters. These warned villagers not to cooperate with foreign forces or government officials. Sometimes they offered protection. Sometimes they offered threats. often both. And then there were the targeted killings. Village elders who openly supported the government were assassinated. Police commanders disappeared. Teachers were warned, then attacked. These acts were not random terror, they were strategic. They removed resistance while sending a clear message. The shadow government was watching. By the mid-2000s, entire districts were effectively under Taliban administration at night, even if government flags flew during the day. This dual power structure became known as the government of the day and the government of the night. Villagers learned to navigate both, but they knew which one would still be there tomorrow. Foreign forces struggled to understand this system. Military operations focused on killing fighters and capturing territory. But every time troops left, the shadow government returned. It did not need bases or convoys. It lived inside communities. What made this system so resilient was its local nature. Taliban representatives were often from nearby villages. They spoke the same dialects. They knew family histories, land boundaries, and old rivalries. You cannot raid a system that dissolves into the population, and you cannot replace governance with force alone. Over time, even some government officials began negotiating with Taliban shadow administrators. Deals were made, lines blurred, corruption spread. The idea of a single Afghan state weakened. They were an alternative state, already functioning in thousands of villages. Because if we don't understand how power actually works on the ground, history will repeat itself again and again. And if you want to understand what happened next, how this shadow system turned into open control, and what lessons the world still refuses to learn, visit the channel for the next video.